This is for a first shleima for all the Cholim of Klal Israel. Okay, verbal abuse and monetary fraud, the common denominator. Hebrew word for both verbal abuse, verbal and monetary fraud is onah. Mishnah in Bava Kamma 58 pp states that just as there is fraud in monetary matters, so is there fraud in verbal matters. The common denominator between the two is in the resulting pain and damage. The underlying motivations, however, are significantly different. The purpose of monetary fraud is monetary gain, whereas the purpose of verbal abuse and fraud is more subtle, to mislead or cause anguish to another person. We need to understand, therefore, why both actions are given in an identical name. Rabbeinu Yonah in Igres HaTeshuvah and in Shaarei Teshuvah says that the root meaning of the word onah is anguish. It is forbidden to cause anguish to any Jew, whether verbally or commercially, as it says. Do not aggrieve one another, and that's in Vayikra. And our rabbis have stated that this refers to verbal abuse and oppression. When the term is not used in the context of monetary transactions, it refers to verbal oppression. According to Rabbeinu Yonah, the common thread between these two types of fraud is the fact that they cause anguish. Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, in the commentary of the Torah in Vayikra, explains the connection as follows. The term onah can be defined as exploitation of a weakness of another person for the purpose of hurting them. There is a common factor between monetary deceit and verbal fraud. In both of them, the perpetrator exploits the weakness of his fellow man to his detriment. The weakness is in his lack of knowing the quality of merchandise or in his emotional sensitivity. Okay, well, let's continue that tomorrow.
Okie dokie. All right. So this has been particularly tough, this one, but let me just add the context. So we're on the 77th daf, okay, and having clarified Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish's respective interpretations of Rabbi Shimon's ruling in the Mishnah that one who steals and slaughters an offering for which the owner is responsible pays the fourfold or fivefold penalty. The Gemara examines why each one rejected the interpretation of the other. Now, it's understandable Rav Yochanan does not say as Reish Lakish does, for Rav Yochanan wishes to interpret Rabbi Shimon's ruling in the Mishnah as applying to even unblemished offerings, and obviously most certainly to blemished kodashim, who were slaughtered outside the temple courtyard. And I'm going to explain to you what that means now. But for what reason does Reish Lakish not hold as Rav Yochanan does? Reish Lakish would say to you, the Torah states with respect to the fourfold or fivefold payment, and slaughters or sells it. And that's from Exodus chapter 21, verse 37, which is Shmot. So by we learned on Saturday night, by juxtaposing slaughtering and selling, the verse indicates a comparison between the two acts. So wherever the stolen animal is subject to the law of sale, it's subject to the law of slaughter. But wherever it's not subject to the law of sale, it's not subject to the law of slaughter. And in the case of these unblemished offerings, since if one sells unblemished offerings, it doesn't constitute a sale, because an unblemished kodashim can't be deconsecrated and rendered chulin, and therefore you can't sell it. So in that particular case, they are not subject to the law of slaughter either. Okay, so in that case, that's going where since the sale is prohibited, according to Reish Lakish, the slaughter is prohibited. If you're looking at the case of a treifa, it reverses. Where a slaughter is prohibited because you can't derive benefit, there's no four or fivefold payment for the thief that slaughters a stolen animal. So do you see how Reish Lakish is inverting it? Okay, and then the Gemara adds, and they Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan are consistent with the opinion stated elsewhere. For it was stated, if a thief sells a treifa, what's the law according to Rabbi Shimon? Rav Yochanan says he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for selling a treifa. But Reish Lakish says he's exempt. Why did Rav Yochanan say he's liable? Because although a treifa is not subject to the law of slaughter, according to Rabbi Shimon, It's nevertheless subject to the law of sale because you can sell it as a working animal to a Jew, or alternatively as a meal to a non-Jew. But Reish Lakish says he is exempt because since it's not subject to the law of slaughter, according to Rabbi Shimon's, by Reish Lakish's interpretation, it's not subject to the law of sale either. Okay, so we can see that Reish Lakish is making this comparison between selling and slaughter. So, Gavin, what we're saying is in that first example, unblemished Kedoshim in the temple courtyard, you can't sell it because they can't be deconsecrated, and therefore, since you can't sell it, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment if the thief tries to. So therefore, there's no payment that the thief would have to pay for slaughtering the animal, as far as that's concerned. Unless do you get what I'm saying, the unblemished side. But Rav Yochanan is interpreting Rabbi Shimon says the one doesn't necessarily preclude the other, because if you take the case of treifa, you can't slaughter it, but you can sell it. If you take the case of unblemished kedoshim in the temple courtyard, you can slaughter it for consecration, and then partake of it, but you can't sell it. So, in other words, Rav Yochanan interprets Rabbi Shimon that if you can sometimes be liable to the one, you're not necessarily liable to the other. And Reish Lakish says if you're not liable to slaughter, you're not liable to sale. Okay, that's the bottom line. So we're coming from that point now and hitting a little bit of a tough topic. Rav Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish from a brisa. We touched on this. Rav Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish from the brisa that states one who steals a hybrid and slaughters it, or steals a treifa and sells it, pays the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So Rav Yochanan is saying that this is a proof that a treifa in fact can be sold, even though you can't slaughter a treifa and partake in it because it's not a valid slaughter, since the animal is going to die anyway, you can't consume it. Okay, that's his proof that it doesn't mean that you can't sell a treifa. Okay, that's his evidence. But now we want to know the subject of the hybrid. We want to discuss this. So we said a hybrid is a cross between a goat and a sheep. Okay, now we said it's forbidden to crossbreed 2 species. Kevin and I both said it's from Parsha Noach, from Kilayim, where not Parsha Noach, apologies, Parsha Bereshit, where there was a fight between Cain and Abel. And therefore you're not allowed to have wool and linen together, and you can't mix certain items of produce, and so too certain animals you can't crossbreed. But so the offspring itself is permitted for consumption and benefit. So so where is this whole pasuk from with regards to the brisa? It's you just have to look in the Torah in Shemot chapter 21 verse 37. It states that one who steals a seh, samachay, and slaughters or sells it pays 4-fold. So, guys, a seh is a term that encompasses both goats and sheep. In its very literal sense, it's actually a cross between a goat and a sheep as well. Okay, so that's as far as a hybrid is concerned. Now we're going to discuss what is a hybrid. Now, is not the brisa reflecting the view of Rabbi Shimon? In other words, it's saying the fact that the brisa basically prescribes the 4 or 5-fold payment only to one who sells a stolen treifa, but not to one who slaughters a stolen treifa, indicates that it was authored by Rabbi Shimon, who holds that a thief is not liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment for a slaughter that is unfit. So according to Rashi's explanation, does this go according to Reish Lakish's interpretation of Rav Shimon, or Rav Yochanan's interpretation of Rav Shimon? Kev?
So again?
Okay.
I'm very tired now, actually. It's tired. Okay, just say again, please.
Okay, no problem.
What is it for Rav Yochanan's interpretation? Just say the question.
No problem. All right. So I'm going to say it again, is that it's asking, you know what? Okay, so I've got to then repeat the brisa for a second. One who steals a hybrid and slaughters it, or steals a treifa and sells it, pays a 4 or 5-fold payment. So it's asking, is the brisa reflecting the view of Rabbi Shimon according to Reish Lakish or according to Rav Yochanan?
I don't know.
Okay, so Gavin, what is Reish Lakish's law? It's going to get much more complicated than this, believe me.
This one's Rav Yochanan, this particular example.
Excellent. Why? Excellent. Why?
Because he allows, he's not, with Reish Lakish, if you can't sell it, if you can't slaughter it, you can't sell it.
Excellent. Perfect answer. That's exactly the perfect answer. So then so evidently, even though a treifa is not subject to the law of slaughter, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's subject to the law of sale. So obviously, Gavin's spot on the mark is that this would go against Reish Lakish and for Rav Yochanan. Okay, that's why Rav Yochanan's using it as a proof. Excellent, yeah? So Reish Lakish now has to deflect the challenge. So Reish Lakish said to Rav Yochanan, no, the brisa might in fact reflect the opinion of the rabbis. Okay? So the rabbis, we having to refer here back to the 70th stuff, even though we're on 77, and it says the Tana Kamma, who's the anonymous general rabbinic opinion, rules that an unfit slaughter constitutes a slaughter that renders the thief liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So this is what you've got to bear in mind, Gavin, is that it's only Rav Shimon that says that if an animal is a treifa, you can't both the rabbis agree. Okay, both the rabbis agree and Rabbi Shimon. This is when it's going to get complicated, Kev. I know you're exhausted and I can see your eyes closing. Would it help you if you stretch a bit for a minute?
No, I'm okay now.
Okay.
I'll start it back.
Okay, so what we are saying is, in terms of kashrut, Kevin, a treifa, you can't shecht it and consume it. And it's on this basis that Rabbi Shimon says, if you can't consume it as a thief, you can't get benefit from it, right? So therefore, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment to the original owner. You just pay double for what you stole. The rabbis don't agree. The rabbis say that, yes, you can't consume it from a kashrut point of view. There they agree with Rabbi Shimon. But they say the thief is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. And the reason being is the pasuk says, if you sell or slaughter an ox or sheep, you pay the 4-fold or 5-fold. It's not specific. How do you know that the original? How do you know that the thief knew it was treifa? It's an internal ailment. Is he a vet? He's thought to deprive the original owner of the animal. If it was a working animal, well, Betsy is dead. She ain't working the fields no more. So, according to the rabbis, it still means the thief is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Thief did wrong. It doesn't mean just because the thief doesn't get benefit and it turned out sour for the thief that he's off the hook for the 4 or 5-fold payment. Rabbi Shimon says he is off the hook, so if he doesn't benefit, he doesn't get it. But both agree that you can't consume a treifa animal because it's going to die anyway. You can't consume it. So, Reish Lakish is defending his answer and saying, listen, this brisa is pretty easy to deal with. He's saying it's not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, it's the opinion of the rabbis, who maintain that a treifa is subject to the law of slaughter as well. In other words, if a thief sells it or slaughters it, the thief is eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment. Rabbi Shimon, however, holds that a treifa is not subject to the laws of slaughter, nor does it subject to the laws of sale either. So Reish Lakish says, I still stand by what I'm saying. When Reish Lakish says the thief is not eligible to the 4 or 5-fold payment for slaughtering, it includes the selling of the animal. Because he says, if you can't get benefit from slaughtering the animal, why could you get benefit from selling it? Okay? And as far as Rabbi Shimon's concerned, Rav Yochanan's explanation of Rabbi Shimon, well, you could sell it to a non-Jew, or you could sell it as a working animal, perhaps. I'm not saying he's saying that. It's a reason I'm thinking that it's fine. I'm not saying he says that. He just says that you can sell it. I'm just giving you reasons I think. Okay. So, yeah. What are you going to ask?
So that he has a potential to get benefit if he could still sell it to somebody.
Correct.
So then maybe in all cases there should be a 4 or 5-fold payment levied.
Correct. Maybe Reish Lakish is saying you have to be stringent. You don't want to risk selling it to one doesn't want to risk selling it to a Jew who might think it's fine and slaughters it. So therefore, in that case, it's risky. You know, they're holding at different opinions. But the thing of it is, Reish Lakish is saying, listen, this brisa doesn't necessarily reflect the opinion of Rav Yochanan's explanation of Rabbi Shimon. It could be the rabbi's opinion that the same way, the Tanna Kamma's opinion in the 70th daf, the same way that the thief is eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment if he slaughters a sheep or an ox, the same way here, he would be eligible for payment according to the rabbis, not Reish Lakish, if he sells the sheep or ox. So Reish Lakish says, yes, I agree that my opinion is not that of the rabbis. And this is the explanation of the rabbis. It doesn't mean that my opinion of Rabbi Shimon is incorrect. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you get his defense? Then we can move on. All right. Now, so it's going to get a lot tougher. This is the easy part. Okay. So the Gemara counters, but if the brisa reflects the opinion of the rabbis, why does it prescribe the 4-fold or 5-fold payment only for the sale of a treifa? Now that's pretty interesting. Is then a treifa, in their view, subject only to the laws of sale, but not to the laws of slaughter? So what it's saying there is, well, the brisa is pretty specific. It says there's a 4 or 5-fold payment due for the sale of a treifa, but it doesn't mean that there's any penalty due for the slaughter of a treifa, which would seem to go, according to Rav Yochanan's opinion, that a thief is exempt if he slaughters a treifa because you can't consume it. It's pretty good as a response. Do you get it, Kev? Have I lost you a little bit? Okay. I don't know at any point if Arthur's also hearing me. I hope so. Please.
I'm just very tired. I'm not.
No problem.
The heat and I get up and the day, but it's good to say it again.
I'm happy you're just attending. So I'm happy.
The treifa. Okay, so even though the treifa one can't get benefit from, there should if he should still pay, the thief should still pay the 4-fold, 5-fold payment.
No. So what we are saying is, Rav Shlokish is saying that, look, the brisa might reflect the opinion of the rabbis. They maintain that a treifa is subject to the 4 or 5-fold payment for not only the slaughter or the sale. Doesn't mean that Rabbi Shimon holds that a treifa is not subject to the laws of slaughter, nor does it subject it to the laws of sale. So all Reish Lakish is saying is, well, this doesn't have to reflect the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. It could reflect the opinion of the rabbis, who say that there is a 4-fold or 5-fold payment for slaughtering a treifa or selling a treifa. Reish Lakish says Rabbi Shimon disagrees with the Tanna Kamma, and I am holding that you can't sell it nor slaughter it from the biblical verse. So the two are always work in conjunction with each other. If you can't slaughter it, you can't sell it, and vice versa. So the Gemara now asks a question in Reish Lakish, Kevin, and it says the following. But if the brisa actually reflects the opinion of the rabbis, why does it prescribe the 4-fold or 5-fold payment only for the sale of a treifa? Is then a treifa, in their view, subject only to the laws of the sale, meaning, but not to the laws of the slaughter? So what it's saying is here, it can't be reflecting the rabbis, because the brisa is only mentioning that there's a 4-fold or 5-fold penalty for selling a treifa, not for slaughtering a treifa, which again now is reasserting itself according to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion of Rabbi Shimon. It's a pretty good answer to Reish Lakish. Do you hear? It's saying, why choose one? Why not be specific on both if you're in fact correct and the law of one can be derived from the other? So the response to that, Reish Lakish says, and then this is where it's going to start to get a little bit more complex. Well, he said, well, then what do you wish to say? That the Brisa reflects the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and that Rabbi Shimon would impose to the fourfold or fivefold penalty for selling the treifa, even though he would impose no such penalty for slaughtering it. So it's saying, well, are you actually proposing it would be according to Rav Yochanan's opinion? He said it's a problem, Rav Yochanan's opinion, because you would still be confronted with a similar difficulty in the Brisa's case of a hybrid. In other words, the Brisa prescribes the fourfold or fivefold payment only for the slaughter of a hybrid. Is then a hybrid subject only to the laws of slaughter but not to the laws of sale? So what Reish Lakish is saying is they say, look, you've got that exclusivity of one item with a hybrid. And we know that's not true. In other words, if a thief steals a hybrid, which is a mixture of two animals, and he sells it, okay, we know there's a four or fivefold payment. We know if he slaughters it, the thief owes the four or fivefold payment. So it's saying, like, you can't have it both ways. If you want to say that the emphasis is only on exemption of the slaughter but not the sale, then why does it have the opposite emphasis on a hybrid, that there's no penalty if you sell it, but there is a penalty if you slaughter it? What's so special about a hybrid that you can't sell it? Which is a pretty good counter argument. Do you get what I'm saying? Kev, you following me a little bit?
Just say, because surely a hybrid should be in a different category. Maybe it shouldn't be even classified as a normal ox or sheep. No,
but what he's saying is as follows, right? He's saying as follows. Listen, I'm gonna, if I read the Brisa, it's going to make sense. So the Brisa says very simply, one who steals a hybrid and slaughters it, or one steals a treifa and sells it, pays the four or fivefold payment. So what Reish Lakish is saying is right. You want to say this is according to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion of Rabbi Shimon, where it still mentions that there's a four or fivefold payment for selling a treifa, but not for slaughtering it. And you think that's the opinion because it just focuses that there's a penalty for selling it, but not for slaughtering it. And you think that backs up Rabbi Yochanan. I can ask you the same question in the hybrid in reverse. I could say, why is there a penalty for slaughtering the hybrid, but not for selling it? Because we know if a thief steals an ox or a sheep, that there's a four or fivefold penalty for both selling it or slaughtering it. And if you look at the word seh in Hebrew with this a samoch and a hay, it actually has a translation in many cases of a sheep. That a sheep is one of the crossbreeding animals that's involved with it. So he's saying it's eligible to the four or fivefold payment. Why all of a sudden are we focusing that there is an eligibility for the thief to pay the four or fivefold if the animal is slaughtered but not sold? If you want to use that exclusivity, it could be used in the case of a hybrid, which comes to prove it's not specifically honing in on one issue. Okay, and I'm going to explain what he means now. So he's saying, just give me a sec. So he's saying that basically, is then a hybrid subject only to the laws of slaughter but not to the laws of sale? Rather, even if we establish that Bryce is reflecting the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, we must say that the Tana taught the law of hybrid with respect to slaughter, and he meant to say, and the same law applies to the law of the hybrid. So what he's saying is, where the Tana stated only that one slaughters, because when he's saying the Tana, he's talking about the Tana Kamma. When the Tana is stating that one who slaughters a hybrid is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, he didn't mean to imply that one who sells a hybrid is exempt. So rather, basically stated that whether you slaughter a hybrid as an example, he wanted to teach that for basically selling a hybrid, there's a four or fivefold payment. He said you only have to use one example in the one and then the converse example in the other. So you can say, according to the rabbis as well, which is, in other words, you can likewise establish the Bryce as reflecting the opinion of the rabbis, who maintain that a treifa is both subject to the laws of sale and slaughter, and you can interpret the Tanna Kamma statement that one who sells a treifa is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment in the same manner that you interpret his statement that one who slaughters a hybrid is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment for both. So the Tanna taught the law of the treifa with respect to the sale and meant to say in the same law applies to the slaughter of a treifa, which means that when the Tanna Kamma stated only that one who sells a treifa is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, he didn't mean to imply that one who slaughters a treifa is exempt. Rather, he stated the sale of a treifa as an example, and he wished to teach that the fourfold or fivefold payment applies to treifa as well, and gave one example of its application. So, Kevin, what Reish Lakish is saying is, look, he used opposite ends. He's saying that when you say that, listen, this is not the view of Rabbi Shimon. It's the view of the rabbis, who uses an inverse reflective statement that basically says, look, as far as the hybrid is concerned, if you sell it, you're liable. And it implies not that you're exempt for not that you're exempt for the slaughter, you're liable for both. And when he mentions the treifa, the rabbis say you're liable for the slaughter, but it doesn't mean you're exempt from the sale either. So he's saying if you use an example of a hybrid as one example, and an example of a treifa as another example, then if you use the slaughter as a one example, you can use the sale as another example, and they're interchangeable. Basically, the rabbis hold different to Reish Lakish's opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and saying if there's a full or fivefold penalty on the slaughter of the hybrid, there's that penalty with regards to the sale, according to the rabbis. And vice versa, if there's a full or fivefold penalty for the slaughter of a treifa, according to the rabbis, there's a full or fivefold penalty for the sale of a treifa, according to the rabbis. He's saying they just used inverse examples, so they're not repetitive. So I'm just going to end off. We've got, we're not going to do the complicated stuff tonight. I need 8 minutes. Okay, so the Gemara rejects Reish Lakish's argument. This is very clever. So listen to this, and we'll end early. Rav Yochanan would say to you, what kind of argument is this? If you say that the Brisa reflects the view of Rabbi Shimon, it's understandable why the Brisa stated the thief's liability only with respect to the slaughter of a hybrid, even though it applies to the sale of a hybrid as well. For since the Tanna Kamma taught the thief's liability with respect to a treifa in only one case, in other words, if the Brisa reflects the view of Rabbi Shimon, it couldn't have stated the case of a hybrid and treifa together, and said that one who slaughters or sells a hybrid or a treifa pays a four or fivefold payment, because one who slaughters a treifa is exempt according to Rabbi Shimon. So it had to separate the two and state with respect to treifa that the liability to a fourfold or fivefold applies only in one case, in the case of a sale, but not in the case of a slaughter. Okay? So it's saying he taught the thief's liability with respect to a hybrid only in one case as well. In other words, although the case of a hybrid penalty applies both to the slaughter and sale, the Tanna Kamma stated one example in order to maintain a symmetry with the case of a treifa. I'm going to clear this up now. Where he couldn't state more than one instance of liability. Otherwise, guys, the sentences would have merged into each other. And so he was limited by one example. He chose to give the example of the case of slaughter rather than the case of sale, right? Because the penalty for slaughter is mentioned first in the pasuk, and he slaughters or sells it, okay? So what he's saying is that he had to use an example of the treifa alone, that you're exempt for slaughtering it. But that's why I couldn't mix it with the hybrid example at all. But as far as a hybrid, you're liable whether you sell or slaughter it, because it's like a normal sheep in a way that you're selling, even though it's crossbred. So it's as if you sell a sheep or an ox, so it's still covered. Now, I'll tell you what the proof that he's going to bring now, which is great. If you say that the Brisa reflects the view of the rabbis, who maintain that the four or fivefold payment applies to the slaughter, or sale of both a hybrid and a treifa, then let the Tana Kamma mix and teach them together by stating, one who steals a hybrid or a treifa and slaughters or sells them pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Gemara concedes this is indeed difficult according to Reish Lakish. So what Rav Yochanan's final argument is, which is very difficult for Reish Lakish to answer, is that the Brisa could have said one who steals a hybrid or a treifa and slaughters or sells them pays a four or fivefold payment. The fact that it didn't means that your principle doesn't work. That is the opinion of the rabbis, where it could be extended to a slaughter and sale of both the hybrid as well as the treifa. Because otherwise the Brisa would have worded it exactly in the manner that Rav Yochanan just gave us an example here, which is a much more concise. He said the reason it couldn't have been concise is they had to separate the concept of a treifa where there's no four or fivefold penalty for slaughtering it because it's not kosher, so the thief didn't get benefit. But he is eligible for that penalty for selling it because you can use it as a work animal to sell it to non-Jews. But a hybrid, there is a penalty for both the slaughter and sale, and that's why it has to separate the statement. And it applies to both. The only reason why it mentions the slaughter in terms of eligibility is because the previous case mentioned eligibility of the four or fivefold, liability, Kevin, for the liability for the four or fivefold payment, even with regards to a slaughter with regards to a hybrid. Get what I'm saying? So in other words, we learned the previous case with regards to a treifa, there's liability for the four or fivefold payment there. But we didn't know anything about does that count with a hybrid, which is why the next case had to be separated and say that there's a four or fivefold liability for a thief who slaughters or steals a hybrid because it's still a sheep. And what's the proof? And I'm going to end off on that is again, Rav Yochanan says that the Tana Kamma could have simply mentioned in the Brisa, if you steal a hybrid or a treifa and slaughter or sell them, you pay the four or fivefold payment. That's the most eloquent, concise way to do it. The fact that it didn't means you couldn't. Okay. It's done.
Yeah.
It's gonna get much more
77A2. What
So it's 77B